Why not lie? Bruce Charlton. We live in what must surely be the most calculatedly untruthful society and civilization in world history, where dishonesty is expected and demanded of many people in their work, on a daily, hourly basis. So, given that it is so expedient to do so, why not lie, since everybody else does? In a neatly composed post, blogger Reverend Matt puts forward a coherent psychological argument against lying, which is that a life built on lies is like that of an undercover spy, the liar always needing to be vigilant, anxious, ever vulnerable to exposure. This may psychologically be true of most individual persons who have constructed their lives based on dishonesty, but it does not apply to the prevalent form of untruthfulness here and now, which is to sustain and defend the social lies of our totalitarian civilization. This is actually less stress-inducing than it is to think, and maybe, speak truth. The harm is thus primarily spiritual, rather than psychological. It is the harm from sustaining systematic dishonesty and calculated misleading, and from defending it as good, and doing so for our innermost selves, in conscience. Such is to invite evil into one's heart, with inevitable adverse spiritual consequences that will not be repented for so long as the lie is self-excused. That is the real reason why not to lie. There are, however, some individuals who positively enjoy living a lie. Some spies seem to be of this sort. Such people experience a sense of their own superiority at deceiving people. And, if they are caught in the lie, they likewise enjoy either worming their way out of the situation, by whatever means is effective, or perhaps brazenly admitting they have fooled so many people for such a long time, and laughing at the gullibility of others. The same applies to science and academia more widely. It is much less stressful, and more immediately gratifying, to go along with whatever current untruths are prevalent among the leadership class, than it is to pursue truth and to speak truth. The darkest dark I have experienced. Francis Berger. The winter solstice always marks the darkest time of year in the northern hemisphere. However, this year seemed far darker than any previous winter solstice I have ever experienced. Of course, the perceived increase in darkness has nothing to do with the sun being above the horizon for less time than in previous years, but rather with the somber and somewhat dismal greyness and fog that has blanketed northwestern Hungary for the better part of 3 weeks. Greyness and fog are typical of winters here, and they commonly settle over the landscape for a week or two at a time. However, they rarely dominate the weather as oppressively as they have this past month, during which I can only recall seeing the sun or the blue of the sky once in the past 4 weeks. Oddly enough, the drab, dull days and impenetrable nights have provided considerable space for contemplation. In some ways, they have complemented the rather somber frame of mind that settled over me at about the same time the grey, foggy days began. This grim frame of mind has nothing to do with my overall mood, which remains buoyant. I suppose it reflects a generally dour attitude towards people that I have not been able to shake, despite my best efforts, in much the same way the outside world has not been able to free itself of the greyness and fog. Once again, my grave and severe outlook about people has not diluted my overall mood, which remains light-hearted and carefree. I suppose I could say that this outlook is observational rather than judgmental. Not stern disapproval, simply registering what I see and experience. The deep stain of depersonalization seems to be deepening and spreading. The dismal perspective that has settled over me does not reflect or stem from my most personal of relationships, which, thankfully, remain as solid and well-oriented as ever, a poignant reminder that, high above the greyness and the fog obscuring the sky, high above the darkest dark I have experienced, it is still blue, and at night, rich with the pulsing silver of an endless sea of stars. not just super preppers. What are the covert assumptions of the high-level globalist rulers? Bruce Charlton. Anyone who has a, more or less, coherent religious basis, can observe that the high-level global ruling class is pursuing some kind of covert strategy, a long-term, multi-generational, hidden agenda. This can be seen by examining the tenacity of the major ideological schemes, which I call litmus tests. In a world of fads and fashions and attention fatigue, mass immigration has been imposed upon all developed nations without exception over decades. The same applies to political leftism, socialism, feminism, anti-racism, sexual revolution, the CO2 climate agenda, and now a.i.apostrophe, and there are several other examples. All of these just are incoherent, both internally and between the strategies, and all are functionally destructive at the international, national, and local levels. At a superficial level, these net destructive programs have all greatly enhanced the concentration of power and wealth among the globalist and national rulers, even as they dismantle the basis for that power and wealth, and accelerate eventual civilizational collapse. Some argue that this selfishness of elites is the primary cause of the litmus test strategies. By this argument, the globalist rulers are merely a species of prepper, who are working together to ensure that they themselves and their allies will be the ones to survive any major international downfall. Instead of remote mountain fastnesses, and little gangs based on self-sufficiency and low-tech. The ruling class preppers believe they can themselves best be preserved by town-sized survival zones, totalitarian control and organization, an elite supported and served by a small but powerful class of armed protectors/enforcers, and an enslaved, technological experts. Apparently these are intended to do their work mostly by computers and the deployment of AI and robots. Note, I do not regard this scenario, or something similar, as actually possible in real life, but I do believe that they believe it and are motivated by it. However, I regard it as a serious mistake to assume that selfishness is the primary motivating force behind these strategies. Such a long-term commitment to the covert strategy, in the face of so many kinds of resistance, implies to me that they regard themselves as engaged in some kind of ultimately beneficial agenda. Beneficial, that is, by a secular utilitarian argument, based on some very particular assumptions. What makes sense of the covert strategy is that they are convinced that there will be a massive and unavoidable collapse of global civilization, and that they suppose their plans are a rational and best possible response to this catastrophic inevitability. They are being told, and are telling each other, that the covert agendas are means to an end. An end that is for the eventual benefit of mankind, a course of action that will minimize the totality of inevitable suffering, and preserve as much of civilization as realistically possible. They see themselves as tough-minded pragmatists and realists, who have the onerous responsibility of making very difficult choices, with the overall aim of getting the best achievable outcome from an unavoidably disastrous situation that will entail enormous human suffering, and the deaths of literally billions, i.e. an assumption of looming certain death of a large majority of the world population. This kind of covert assumed and predicted framework is probably the basis for the sustained cohesion and purpose of the globalist leadership class, and the basis for their energy, direction, and self-confidence, and self-superiority. Because apparently they see themselves as noble rulers doing a dirty but necessary job that nobody else can or will do. And their personal enrichment and tyrannical powers are self-justified as necessary means to this necessary end. Yet, if that is indeed, more or less, the story they tell themselves, and even though it does contain some truth, for instance, I agree with an analysis that predicts that global civilization will collapse, and that billions will die, that is not the whole story. because the story is rooted in secular utilitarian this worldly assumptions and values, that are themselves intractably incoherent and cannot serve as a valid basis for any kind of morality. And this is what has led the global rulers into being willingly manipulated into doing the work of demonic powers of evil. The real agenda behind the globalists' covert agenda is one of the satanic corruption and damnation of souls, and by this understanding, the globalist rulers are the first victims, eager dupes who, regardless of what happens in this world in the future, have actually, as things stand now, chosen for themselves an eternal destiny of demonic servitude. A world in which God could lose. Francis Berger. In his homily during last Sunday's Mass, our village priest explained how our good choices, fully aided by divine grace, and our evil choices both serve to fulfill God's ultimate plan and purpose for creation. He then went on to stress the significance of comprehending that our choices, be they good or bad, have no bearing whatsoever on God's sovereign will, which will always prevail and be fulfilled regardless of what we choose. Thus, all of our ungodly choices, regardless of how ungodly they may actually be, are inconsequential when it comes to God's will. The only consequences such choices carry are the suffering we inevitably inflict upon ourselves, suffering that, once again, has zero impact on God's decreed will. Along the same lines, our good choices, which are only possible through God's grace, amount to little more than adhering to God's will, which raises the question of just what and how much such choices actually contribute to the whole process. Anyway, in a nutshell, the village priest affirmed the immutability of God's will and divine plan, which human action cannot thwart in any way whatsoever and which will be accomplished, nay, already has been accomplished, regardless of human input. He then took a moment to stress that God's sovereign will in no way impinges upon our own God-given human free will. I was eager to listen to him elaborate on that point a bit, but the priest left the matter there and quickly switched his focus to the symbolic meaning behind the fourth Advent Sunday. Now, there are 1,001 explanations about why and how God's sovereign will wins no matter what, and I am certain the village priest is satisfied with most of them. Regardless, I left the Mass wondering how much different Christianity would have been and would be today if Christian theology and doctrine allowed for the potential thwarting of God's sovereign will or the possibility that evil human thoughts and actions, or evil thoughts and actions of all beings in creation, could, in some way, prevent God's will from being fulfilled, at least ideally. Conversely, how much different Christianity would have been or would be if Christians assumed that their good choices actually influenced God in some meaningful way. Put another way, I found myself wondering if Christians would regard their religion and themselves more seriously if they held out the possibility that God could lose and that his divine will could be derailed, at least in this world. If such a thing were possible, it would surely expand and deepen the significance of good choices. Of course, if Christians assumed that God could lose in this world, they would not limit their understanding of freedom to the doctrine of free will, but that is another matter entirely. Of course no one wants war, but Francis Berger. A false flag or two, real or not, it doesn't matter, coupled with 24-hour media coverage would probably be more than enough to turn the average man of the street into a committed war supporter. Remember, no one wanted a global pandemic either, but we got one regardless. Wonder how? Note, a tad too much optimism out there about how the masses will reject war outright. Don't get me wrong, I would love to see it, and I hope it happens. Unfortunately, it probably won't happen, and I humbly suggest that the optimists leave more space open for the manifestation of such a possibility. Nationalism 2025 is just another top-down, leftist, ideology. Bruce Charlton. Real bottom-up nationalism was a phenomenon of the late 19th and early 20th century. It was, indeed, the first attempt by developing nations to do without religion as the basis of social cohesion. Specifically, it was the first post-Christianity ideology. Instead of a common religion, the basis for social cohesion was intended to be racial and national identity, blood and soil. This early nationalism sometimes worked as a primary motivator, perhaps because it necessarily included a residue of common national religion, for example in Ireland, or Spain, where, for a while, nationalists ruled in collaboration with the Roman Catholic Church, but this strength was always brief, and faded after a generation or so. Since then, and this includes the post-empire forms, nationalism has been, like all other forms of mainstream politics, essentially a top-down, ruling class-driven ideology. Later nationalism was, and is, a local elites project. That is, a matter of the local clerical and managerial class, often journalists, school teachers and clerks, trying to propagandize the masses to support their plans of fragmentation of a larger political unit, into smaller national groupings. This fragmentation brought new career and other opportunities for the local elites, who had previously been kept out of power by the larger unit's leadership class. But the bottom line is that such nationalism is just another variant of leftism, i.e. it is a type of secular materialism, with utilitarian values rooted in this worldly hedonism, i.e. the claim to optimize human gratification, in this instance of indigenous members of the nation. Nationalism nowadays shares the arbitrariness and incoherence of other leftisms. It entails vast efforts of propaganda to be disseminated by media, and education, and enforced by laws and the state bureaucracy. It survives by pandering to the local elites, whose careers and status depend on sustaining the nationist fictions, however feeble. What is more, in the past several decades nationalism has failed everywhere from Ireland to Iceland to sustain itself. Indeed, even ideologically nationalist leaders have in practice and overwhelmingly willingly and enthusiastically embraced the most destructive aspects of globalism, from self-subjection to multinational groupings and agencies, EU, UN, WHO etc., assimilation into international finance and trade, and enforced native population subordination to and replacement by the necessarily destructive phenomenon of mass immigration. Self-styled nationalism in 2025, such as that in Scotland, Australia, New Zealand, is merely a film of window dressing applied to conceal some of the most globalist, servile and native population self-destructive even in our corrupted world. Nationalism as of here and now is therefore a false and delusional hope, futile at best, but most likely just another agent for the agendas of international totalitarianism, and/or societal chaos leading towards World War III. Merry Christmas Day, Coventry Carol by Maddy Pryor. Bruce Charlton. Many people's favorite sad carol, the Coventry Carol, is here performed by the unsurpassed Maddy Pryor. The song includes perhaps the most famous example of a Picardy third cadence, at the end of the chorus. Coventry Carol is in a tragic minor key, as befits the subject matter, but the last chord includes a major third, so that the tune ends on a happy note. Apparently, this was normal in ancient times, when, presumably because of our expectation of salvation, it was felt inappropriate for Christians to end musical pieces in a tragic way. So the last chord of any piece should either be an open or bare fifth, sounding the tonic and fifth notes, or else needed to have a major third interval of 4 semitones, rather than finishing with a minor third of just 3 semitones interval. Merry Christmas Day. Finally, a sort of white Christmas. Francis Berger. Having spent the first half of my life in places where white Christmases were virtually guaranteed, I have experienced nothing but disappointment in this regard since moving to northwestern Hungary, where 9 of the 10 past Christmases have been green. Nevertheless, my 11th Christmas here provided a pleasant surprise. A thin, 3-centimeter layer of snow blanketed everything when I woke up early this morning. A winter wonderland it was not. Still, going for a walk in the fragile white landscape after the Christmas morning mass lifted my already cheery spirit in ways I had not experienced for nearly a decade. Unfortunately, but not unexpectedly, most of the snow had vanished by noon, but the white Christmas feeling remains with me, even now, in the damp early evening. Merry Christmas to all. Sauron-Saruman, why did Tolkien make his 2 main villains have such similar reading names? Bruce Charlton. While Tolkien's discernment as a creative writer enabled him to dodge nearly all the potentially most embarrassing examples of character naming, there remains the rather glaring problem that the names of the 2 main villains Sauron and Saruman are too similar, so similar as to be confusing, and especially to the first-time reader. They certainly confused my 13-year-old self, when I sometimes got them mixed up, probably from my habit of inwardly pronouncing Sauron as Saw-on, and Saruman as Saw-mun. So why did Tolkien make this error? Why did his 2 main baddies end up with such superficially similar names? I don't know of any definitive evidence from Tolkien on this question, but I think we can infer a plausible, and probable, answer to this question. If we can assume that Sauron's name arose first and had become fixed and non-negotiable during the writing of Lord of the Rings, then it is the naming of the later arriving Saruman that needs to be explained. Saruman is attributed to the Anglo-Saxon/Old English language which Tolkien ascribes to the Riders of Rohan as his feigned translation of the in-universe speech. And in Anglo-Saxon man means man as in modern English, while the Saru element of the name refers to the word Seru. I infer that it was the multifaceted meanings and implications of Seru that must surely have struck Tolkien as being so exactly right for the character of Saruman, that I suppose he must have been absolutely determined to keep this name, once he had thought of it. Even though it lead to a problem of similarity to Sauron. In Unfinished Tales, Christopher Tolkien gives the translation of Seru as skill, cunning device, which perfectly captures the chief wizard's character. Skill, he was the most skilled of wizards, but also he was cunning, tending to seek his ends by dubious means, such as trickery, deceit, evasion, and cunning device references that Saruman was a clever maker of tools, contraptions, machines, artifacts. An online Anglo-Saxon dictionary provides a longer list of alterative possible meanings and synonyms for Seru. 1. War gear, weapon. 2. Armor, coat of mail. 3. Device, contrivance, equipment. 4. Skill, art, ability, stratagem, craft, artifice, trick. Meanings 1 and 2 link up with the later, corrupted, Saruman's building and equipping of a formidable army, intended to wage war upon Rohan. My conclusion is that Saruman so perfectly captured the nature of the chief wizard, that the Anglo-Saxon Professor Tolkien simply could not resist sticking to the name Saruman. Despite the problem that the word read too nearly the same as Sauron. In this instance, Tolkien the philologist overcame Tolkien the creative writer. Cool has replaced necessary functionality. Bruce Charlton. Because we live in a materialist and incoherent society, from the nihilistic despair of which we crave temporary alleviation, we are continually seeking enjoyable distraction, which is what people seem to mean by cool. So if anything is enjoyably distracting, it can be termed cool, and this coolness is not merely a justification, but actually that which is most desired, by most people, most of the time. This applies to our discernment regarding current top-down funded, propagandized, subsidized, perhaps mandatory, societal trends. It is sufficient justification if we regard as cool phenomena such as electric vehicles, them paid-for festival or building art installation or landscape feature, an AI application, a provision or service or activity, or whatever. It is also cool if some social or organizational change, typically enforced upon us by the totalitarian system, and incentivized for its adoption, offers us a reasonable chance of short-medium-term enhanced personal earnings, status, or leisure. Even when we know that the long-term effect will be destructive of all these. After all, people reason, who really knows what the future holds? Maybe everything will be okay. And in the long term we are all dead anyway. Coolness evaluations are possible and dominant because very few people nowadays are engaged in any kind of primary functional activity like raising a child, growing food, or making/building/transporting something genuinely valuable or necessary. New stuff, discoveries, inventions, technologies, media, etc., is therefore judged by very subjective and easily influenced criteria, and most of the most powerful influences, nowadays, are top-down emanations of the totalitarian system. So, as well as innovations being top-down devised and imposed, judgments of these innovations are also top-down controlled. New stuff therefore comes to people pre-packaged as useful and life-enhancing, or even pushed as civilizationally vital, on the vaguest of grounds. To which opposition is idiotic or retrograde. When actually the new stuff is merely cool. At best. Christianity, and other unfortunate predictions for 2026. Bruce Charlton. My prediction for 2026 is that AI will continue to subvert self-identified Christians, as well as everybody else, in particular that AI outputs will increasingly be cited as authority, evidence, or proof. This has, of course, already begun, but I am predicting that AI outputs will become put forward as publicly official, as the bottom line reason why we should, or should not, believe, think, or obey X. This is the latest step in a long-term trend by which all forms of public knowledge, including Christian knowledge, have been. 1. First, a long time ago, made a matter of consensus, of some kind, a majority vote kind of discernment. Then, 2. Consensus formation was absorbed into bureaucracy. And upcoming. 3. Bureaucratic procedures will be, or at least this will be claimed, made objective and computerized, by the post-2022 version of globalist-generated AI. This is why Christians are failing the AI litmus tests, because most Christians have externalized their acknowledged source and nature of authority, for example in a church, or in a scripture, or in a theology, and all forms of external authority have been, are being, will increasingly be sucked into the consensus, bureaucratic, AI system. This means that mainstream church-orientated/scripture-faithful Christians will, step by step, but swiftly, soon find themselves believing one or another AI Christianity. And AI Christianity will be destructive to the possibility of that individual person actually following the real Jesus Christ. Because AI is, by design and implementation, overall, and overwhelmingly, an instrument of damnation. A sub but related prediction is that there will be a greater use of attempted, threatened, and actual physical coercion in implementing public policy, including the decisions of AI. This will be necessary because the ruling class agenda is ever more obviously destructive and evil, and the propaganda/education mechanisms for ensuring adequate brainwashed compliance of the masses are breaking down rapidly. Also because the agents of chaos party among the Western rulers wants there to be more violence everywhere, so physical coercion and human suffering are, for them, self-justifying. A chain of loving relationships, how Christians may help those they love to get to heaven. Bruce Charlton. I am impressed and convinced by the way that the fourth gospel always describes Jesus' love in terms of specific and interpersonal loving relationships. This is a very different definition from the more usual understanding of Christian love as ideally having such attributes as unconditional, altruistic, even impersonal. Given that I believe we choose to accept or reject Jesus' gift of resurrected eternal life after our death, this interpersonal understanding of Christian love has helped me to grasp how it is that our love during this mortal life may help others whom we love to choose heaven. It works as a chain of loving relationships. In brief, once one person has chosen resurrected eternal life, so long as that dweller in heaven has had loving relationships with others during his mortal life, then that first person to be saved sets up a chain of positive influences for those who die afterwards. Salvation is always an absolutely free and autonomous personal choice that can neither be compelled nor prevented. But if we have had a loving relationship during mortal life with someone who has already attained salvation before we die, then after death, and at the time when we must choose whether or not to accept resurrection, that beloved person will visit us, will come into contact with our post-mortal spirit. It seems to me that Mormons are correct in their teaching that the most powerful incentive for Christian salvation is the desire to continue personal relationships beyond death with those we have loved during mortal life. So, when it comes to deciding whether to accept salvation, anyone whom we loved in mortal life, potentially more than one person, but one person is enough, can assure us of the reality of eternal life, its nature, and the presence of those with whom we might to continue relationships. There will always be a free choice, but my point is that knowing there is already some particular person whom we have loved that has made the choice of heaven and who already dwells in that state, could be a positive and decisive influence in favor of accepting salvation. As an illustrative example, suppose there was a woman, a grandmother, who was exceptionally loving during her mortal life, loving her husband, children, sons and daughters-in-law, and grandchildren, and that she accepted Christ's salvation. As her husband, children, grandchildren etc. died, she would be able to visit and assure them of what was possible beyond death, of how the loving relationships of mortal life could be continued, and could continue to develop eternally, post-mortally. The effectiveness of this influence would presumably depend substantially on the strength of interpersonal love during life, and this strength would perhaps, usually, be diluted with succeeding generations, and would cease after 2 or 3 generations. This is where the chain aspect comes in. If the grandmother firstly influenced her daughter to accept salvation, then the daughter would provide her own children with a, potentially more direct, influence of a mother's love, rather than grandmother's, when the time came for the grandchildren to die, and so on down the generations. The chain would also potentially branch, with loved husbands and wives. If the one who dies first accepts salvation, then a loving spousal relationship could provide a link to heaven. Once the system had been going for a few generations, it might resemble a web or network, rather than a chain, which would provide, potentially, more robust because multiple possibility of positive personal loving influences, by which a recently deceased post-mortal spirit may be encouraged or convinced to choose resurrected heavenly life. who looks to regain something he has not lost. Francis Berger. Some took issue with my suggestion that God could lose in this world.
That God could lose. What? Humanity's salvation? Jesus secured that single-handedly. Worldly power? God has a plan to regain it. Jesus again. The work of perfecting our soul. That's the job of the Spirit of, Jesus again.
God has a plan to regain worldly power. Doesn't that imply that he lost it? It must, because one does not seek to regain something one has not lost. And of what interest is worldly power to Jesus? Also, if Jesus did it all, then what are our spiritual roles in creation exactly, besides how we behave to ourselves and our neighbors, of course? We need to start thinking these things through earnestly, starting from ourselves and working outwards, not the other way around. Then creation is not an act of freedom and love. Francis Berger. If it is metaphysically impossible for God to lose in this world, then creation is not an act of freedom and love, but a necessary causal event that has essentially predetermined everything within creation, leaving us with no possibility of co-creation, neither in this world nor in eternity. If God caused things in the deterministic, causal sense, with no need of additional help, no chance of defeat, then the existence of authentic, uncaused freedom is negated, and God is rendered solely responsible for the evil and suffering within creation. If the future is solid, metaphysical concrete, with no chance of defeat, no additional help required, if nothing we think or do affects God's predetermined outcomes in creation, then freedom is a soap bubble and no being can ever hope to be a co-creator in creation, not now, not ever. Natural psychism, what kind of a thing is it? Bruce Charlton. A significant minority of people are, and more claim to be, naturally psychic, spontaneously in touch with the occult world of spirits. They naturally experience life, at least sometimes, as something alive immersed in a spiritual world. This should not be surprising, because probably nearly all children are like this, and it seems likely that some will continue to be, in an unbroken way. While others revert to natural psychism under stress, or powerful stimulation, and or when in altered or clouded state of consciousness, half asleep, trance states, psychosis, intoxication, etc. The results of this kind of natural psychism are variously interpreted. Some people take up this kind of work professionally, whether paid or not, whether altruistically, or for their own personal benefit. Others understand their psychic experiences within one or another religion, and so interpret them as religious experiences. Some try to learn objective knowledge from spiritual contacts and insights of one sort or another, and some of these try to teach others about their discoveries as spiritual insights, or even spiritual systems. My understanding of natural psychism is that it is a personal attribute, neither valuable nor harmful in itself, the value of which depends entirely on what is made of it. But I also feel that, and perhaps for exactly this reason, natural psychism is a bit of a dead end. A dead end in the sense that natural psychism is nothing to be proud of and bragged about, nor is it something to be ashamed of, denied or concealed. Either you have it or you don't, and therefore I regard natural psychism as not something that should be striven for. Seriously, to set out to on a course of training or personality engineering, intending to make oneself more spontaneously spiritually sensitive, is the kind of attempt to change oneself away from what one actually is, that, whether effective or not, and it certainly can be effective, is almost sure to be badly motivated at root. Furthermore, the fact that so many people are, here and now, not psychic, and utterly lack spontaneous psychism, means that the real problem is neither to try and revert to an earlier cultural or personal stage and phase, nor to accept that we are spiritually blind in a world where spirits are really real, but instead to work towards a spiritual awareness that is attuned with, because rooted in, God, divine creation, and our intent for salvation. The spiritual awareness that should be sought, i.e. by everyone, is not, therefore, a going back into immersive pre-consciousness and spontaneity, but forward into a freely chosen enhanced consciousness. Christmas is real. William Wildblood. Just as there are holy places, sites of pilgrimage imbued with the presence of an angel or a saint or special in some other way, so there are holy times, and Christmas is among the holiest. Whether or not Jesus was actually born on December 25th is largely incidental. This is the time he is deemed to have been born. The proximity to the winter solstice, when the sun appears to come back to life in the northern hemisphere, is important, but that is not the whole story. The incarnation of the divine light in the world is the main reality, and the solar phenomenon is but a reflection of that in the physical dimension. The spiritual always precedes the material, not the other way around, as our benighted age generally assumes. The incarnation was at a special time, and it gave a special quality to that time by its very nature. In the past, the Church understood the idea of holy times very well, with her feasts and festivals, all celebrated liturgically and acting as focal points in the year, stations on a railway line, one might almost say. But it is not just the association with an event in Christ's life that is significant here. There is a real quality of time involved, an extra abundance of spiritual presence. Other religions have their festivals too, but I have the impression that these do not travel well, despite the fact that we are now required to give them almost equal consideration. Maybe it takes time for time to acquire sacredness. That and the energy of human devotion. At any rate, in the Western world, the time around Christmas has a special holiness which even the materialism of the present era has not been able to destroy. Time and space are the vessels in which God creates. They are his pen and paper. I am not Catholic, but my wife and children are, and over Christmas I had the choice of either going to a service at Westminster Cathedral on Christmas Eve or to the local Catholic church on Christmas Day. I was told that the church you go to doesn't matter. What matters is celebrating Mass. Fine sounding words, but in my opinion wrong. They remind me of a time I visited Downside Abbey, a beautiful Benedictine monastery in the Gothic Revival style in Somerset. This was in the 1980s, and an ugly modern building, a library, I think, had just been tacked onto the side of the abbey. What a horror, or words to that effect, I tactlessly said to the monk who was kindly showing us around. Not at all, he rejoined. If you have spirituality in your heart, the outer conditions are unimportant. He had quite misunderstood that beauty within requires outer beauty. That doesn't mean it should depend on outer beauty, but nor should it treat the beautiful and the ugly as equal. That is an insult to God, and a desecration of creation. I chose to go to Westminster Cathedral rather than the late 20th century concrete pile in my vicinity. In such surroundings the spirit is elevated rather than diminished and crushed. All this to say that although God is present at all times and in all places, there are certain times and places when he is more present, or when more of him is present. Christmas is one of the times he is most present, because that is when he really did become present in the world. My traditional anti-New Year post. Bruce Charlton. A message for all my loyal readers. Pinch punch, first of the month. No returns. It's really no big deal in the scheme of things, a symptom rather than a cause, and I still, sometimes, wish people a Happy New Year after the numbers click over, and our one-to-one definition of New Year, plain numerological thinking, a discipline so beloved of the totalitarian establishment. But it has become traditional for me to write a curmudgeonly post about the fake/incoherent/demonic practice of calling January 1st New Year. Here 'tis, yet again, and with some new added malice. In our heads, for ourselves, we ought to have some other date for the new year. If we accept that a year is essentially astronomical, then the new year arrives after the winter solstice, whatever date we happen to assign to that, usually the 21st of December, having artificially made periodic adjustments with extra leap years. But, bearing in mind that through most of history the solstice could not be known more accurately than to a span of several days, we ought not to make a fetish of the precise astronomical instant. Solstice is, for the natural man, more of a season than a day. If you are a Catholic Christian, you probably should consider celebrating Lady Day, the Feast of the Annunciation, currently March 25th in the UK, as your inner New Year. As was done in England until 1752, which was, by no coincidence, the time and place when modernity began to ascend to dominance. In essence, today really is the New Year, only because they regard it as a new year for the purposes of their demonic strategies. In this bureaucratic world, where the elimination of human belief in and contact with the spirit, and the divine is primary, the wholly artificial, simultaneously anti-scientific and atheistic date of January 1st does the desired job very well. Just bear that in mind. In particular, from having lived for many years in Scotland among Scots, I have to make allowances for that more deeply mind-controlled race than we English, and their post-religious pseudo-patriotic infatuation with Hogmanay. High and low-level functionality, totalitarian control versus chaos. Bruce Charlton. If I am correct that the ruling class are divided between, on the one side, totalitarian bureaucrats with the aim of omni-surveillance and micro-control, mostly based on the motivation of power. Such people enjoy manipulating people into doing their will. And, on the other side, agents of chaos, whose agenda is destructive, and whose main motivation is resentment, hatred, and spite. They most enjoy immiserating, tormenting and killing people, and any effective purpose is a sufficient excuse for this activity. But these two kinds of evil are always mixed, in practice, and I think the way evil works at the geopolitical and national scale is that the two categories are defined by overall and strategic motivation at the high level. And perhaps necessarily, each kind of evil at the strategic level tends to be balanced, and made short-term more effective, by the other kind of evil at the lower level. So, the totalitarian bureaucrat agenda is essentially ideological at the highest level, and that ideology is leftist, with its various justificatory substrands such as socialism, feminism, anti-racism, climate, healthism etc. It strikes me that there is a kind of division between these groups. Consequently, bureaucratic totalitarianism at a high level almost sabotages itself by destroying functionality at the lower level. This is the well-known phenomenon whereby top-down imposed leftist ideology destroys its own functionality in all kinds of institutions, corporations, organizations, because the low-level people are increasingly doing ideology instead of running the organization. This is why strongly totalitarian leftist organizations so often descend into chaos, and fail to yield their ideological intentions, and we get schools and colleges that do not teach, police indifferent to the law, media entertainment that does not entertain, scientists that hide truth and never discover anything useful etc. etc. Normal modern Western life. In other words, there is a conflict between high-level totalitarianism, and always increasing low-level dysfunctionality, and indeed chaos. The agents of chaos have almost the opposite problem, because in order to pursue the high-level chaos, they need to support functionality at the lower levels. So, in pursuit of global and national chaos, the agents of chaos tend to restore some degree of functionality at a low level, thereby creating a non-chaotic, indeed somewhat anti-chaotic, countercurrent. In order to disrupt agriculture or international trade, or to induce wars, the agents of chaos may need to build up manufacturing functionality, or improved military and intel capability, and they may need to deploy genuinely effective propaganda, these, at least in the short-medium term. Thus, there is a conflict between high-level chaos, and the immediate low-level need for functional power to cause this chaos. My analysis is not meant to be reassuring. Evil is not defeating itself by these conflicts. Instead, the internal contradictions and countercurrents just lead to more evil, of more kinds, in different aspects and places, and make this evil so multiple in nature as to be impossible to defeat by opposition. As always, we are brought around to the truth that opposing evil is futile or counterproductive, and evil can be overcome only by good. Remembering that there is, and can be, no real and effective good, without a personal and loving Creator God. While noting knowledge of such a God is necessary but not sufficient, for truly good intentions. Don't judge a book by its lover. Francis Berger. This post is partly inspired by the following aphorism by Lyth: don't book a judge by his cover. Don't cover a book by its judge, and by some reflection on the reading lists some bloggers post at the end of December. Although I enjoy the glimpses of others' reading habits, I rarely, if ever, read any of the books on those lists, particularly when they are praised or come highly recommended. I don't exactly know why this is so. When I was younger, I eagerly devoured books others had recommended or praised and often went out of my way to track down the titles when they were not readily available. Granted, the books sometimes failed to live up to the praise and recommendations that had been heaped upon them, but I seldom regarded this as a negative. The most important thing for me was that I had read the book in question. Whether I liked it or not, or had gotten anything meaningful out of it, were not huge concerns. Time wasting was not an issue back then. I was still firmly in the mode of gathering reading experiences and aspiring to be well read. My reading habits shifted in my 40s. Being well read lost its allure, and I became immune to the temptations of praise and recommendation, particularly from the mass media, literary critics, and book culture. I also formed the habit of mostly resisting recommendations from people whom I respected, admired or loved unless I felt, and by that I mean deeply felt, that the recommendation or praise originated from sincere motivations that extended into the spiritual, tacitly rather than overtly, usually unconsciously or subconsciously. Oddly enough, such well-motivated, spiritual recommendations often led to disastrous reading experiences that initially had me questioning the tastes and integrity of the recommender. However, with time, I came to understand that these sorts of book recommendations had more to do with something I needed to work at to learn or understand. Whether I liked the book in question was largely irrelevant. What mattered was that I discovered the thing I needed within the pages. I also learned that such recommendations were more about connecting to ideas and establishing relationships with the authors of the books, rather than a bonding experience between the individual who had suggested the book to me. In this sense, the person who had recommended the book became a sort of intermediary between an idea or the author and me. The relationship between the author and me would be unlike the relationship between the author and the intermediary. Nevertheless, we were likely all looking in the same direction, at least in matters of spirit, and I have learned that this is what matters most. AI, settling into a non-existent grey area. Francis Berger. Perhaps the most perturbing aspect of the AI litmus test is the intelligent individuals who see AI as a grey area, and take a middle ground approach to the whole matter. On the one hand, such individuals appear to understand or at least sense the overall manipulative and evil intent of AI, can sense its overarching destructive impact on human thinking, observe its inherent limitations and fakery, and scoff at the overall misnomer of referring to something fundamentally unintelligent as intelligent. On the other hand, the same individuals are most content to laud certain aspects of AI, for example, its apparent ability to summarize effectively, and treat the top-down imposed technology as, at worst, an ethically neutral tool that is chock full of all kinds of utility if approached with the right motivations. Hence, such individuals declare AI to be a grey area. Probably more useful than useless. Neither good nor evil. Inevitable. The future, so why split hairs about it? I don't know how one approaches an innately evil thing with good or, at best, neutral motivations. Perhaps that in and of itself represents the hallmark of the grey area attitude, the ability to see the evil in something yet shrug and coolly state that the jury is still out. Look, there is no grey area when it comes to AI. No vagueness that needs clarifying. No uncertainty that needs certifying. No inseparable, overlapping Venn diagram bubbles. No blurred lines that need to be brought into focus. No middle ground one can contently occupy. It's black and white, clear as day, through and through. Thus, grey area declarations and attitudes about AI are misguided attempts to sidestep an obvious evil under the banner of moderation, intelligence, discernment, and moderation. As far as I can tell, AI is shaping up to be even worse than the Birdemic, during which such grey area types could at least claim they had no choice in the matter or had been summarily tricked by authorities they had trusted. But now, is there any positive value to debating AI? Bruce Charlton. I have long been skeptical about the benefits of arguing, because the result of any significant argument is settled in advance by fundamental, metaphysical, assumptions concerning the nature of that reality under discussions. Unless the metaphysical assumptions can first be acknowledged, then the argument will necessarily be futile or counterproductive, at least in the short term. Sometimes an argument may have a delayed beneficial effect, that can happen. But since AI is the current major project of the global totalitarian leadership, which they devised, launched, on November 30, 2022, and have implemented internationally and coercively, at a cost, probably, of terabillions of dollars and vast quantities of energy, then an argument on the subject can hardly fail to be revelatory of the nature of personal assumptions. And, thereby, by observing somebody's quality and strength of attitude towards the actuality of AI we can sometimes discover which side that person has chosen to fight upon, in the spiritual war of this world. And I mean the actual side that person is actually on, regardless of his self-identification and self-image, because the vast majority of those who believe they oppose the mainstream of leftist are in fact actively in service to that agenda of this worldly ideologically hedonic materialism. This can be valuable, because AI is one of those litmus test issues, which evidently has a strong tendency either to reveal, or indeed actively to shape, a person's entire ideology. I have myself observed, in multiple instances, the way that a failure to understand and inwardly reject the net evil of the globalist AI project, crystallizes an individual into assumptions, attitudes, behaviors etc. that sustain the totalitarian establishment project. In a spiritual sense, what is happening is that external evil can only enter our hearts, souls, inner selves, by invitation. But, when we do invite evil into our heart, and especially when we publicly apologize for, defend, and even promote evil. Then this is a capitulation that, unrepented, will have, and demonstrably does have, rapidly adverse consequences. We then just are a servant of evil, in the spiritual war, and it does not matter that we may suppose or advertise ourselves to be based, or Christian, or whatever. Insofar as it is helpful for our own spiritual quest to identify such people, and not to be misled by their surface protestations, then debating AI has value. It can help us learn something important about another person. But argument does not help, or very seldom, and may actually hinder, any intent of persuading such people to abandon their support of an obviously evil mass project. Note added, as usual, the problem with this latest strategy of evil is that it is so pervasive, so lavishly funded, and so multiply incentivized, that people who are, whatever their protestations, fundamentally this worldly and action-orientated, cannot help but get on board with it. AI advocacy, including pseudo-debate that accepts the fundamental assumptions, offers, at least in the short term, many opportunities for enhanced status, influence, and a sliver of the money. Because the totalitarian system is almost ubiquitous, it can effectively be resisted only spiritually, not materially, and by individual persons, not organizations or institutions, and in their souls, not in socio-politics. I put scare quotes around only because this is the issue at stake. The issue with regard to AI, as with other litmus tests, is about whether or not the spiritual, the individual and the soul are genuinely to be primary in our own personal spiritual lives, whether or not we inwardly affiliate with God, divine creation and following Jesus Christ. What I personally find so dismaying, is that so many public Christians will willingly, indeed eagerly, subordinate their inner commitments to external pressures and propaganda. A Trip to Ootacamund. William Wildblood. My Indian story continued. After Siroya and Krishna, our first maid and gardener, left, we employed Mutu as a new gardener but didn't bother with a maid as there really wasn't enough work to warrant one. The only reason we had one in the first place was because it was expected of us. However, when the guest house was ready to open, we did need a cleaner and general house servant, and so we hired Jane, a spinster in her 40s. Jane had the advantage of speaking English but the disadvantage of being very bossy, though she was also kind-hearted. She regarded it as her job to make sure no one took advantage of us, and many people tried. She herself was honest but had a low opinion of most of the rest of humanity, whom she regarded all to be on the make in one way or another. When Michael's cousin came to visit us in 1981, he described her as a female cockerel, which was a little cruel but not inaccurate. Even so, I liked her and she liked me. She called me Chinna Durai, which means little master in Tamil, Michael being Peria Durai, or big master. Here is a picture of Jane and me. It was taken when I returned to Yercaud briefly at the end of 2003. I was just walking through the bazaar and she came up and greeted me. She hadn't changed much in 18 years. I was pleased to see her, even if we had eventually had to sack her for reasons I will come to at some point. Here is a picture of Mutu on the top lawn with what I called his snake charmer's basket, actually to collect grass cuttings. We had no mower and he cut the grass with what was effectively a pair of scissors. Those were the days. I mentioned Michael's cousin. This was Hugh Christie, a retired army colonel 12 years older than Michael, so aged 73 when he came out to visit. Michael and Hugh were both only children of two sisters, one of whom, Hugh's mother, had left her husband, while the other, Michael's mother, had been abandoned by her husband after he had an affair with the actress Gladys Cooper when Michael was only about a year old. Neither of these two cousins had known their fathers, and because there were no other family members, they were closer than cousins normally are. I liked Michael's cousin, but he was unsure what to make of me at first, which was understandable. Once we got to know each other, he was friendly enough even if he clearly could not comprehend what Michael and I were doing together. But then nor could most people, and even I found it odd on occasion. On the face of it, it made no sense. The masters told me it was intended for a while in my life, but they only said this after I had made the decision to do it, and it had become a settled thing. There was no coercion. I could not expect anyone else to understand the rationale behind it, and although I tried to explain it to my family, they didn't believe my explanation, that there was a spiritual justification for it, and I couldn't blame them for that. In the context of a human life being about worldly achievement and success, it seemed a terrible waste. Meeting the masters goes into this in greater detail. Colonel Christie, as I first called him, or Hugh as I was permitted to call him after a while, he was, after all, 15 years older than my own father, came out to India to visit us in the spring of 1981. He had been in India for several years during and just after the war, but when we met him in Madras it had been 34 years since he was last in the country. It had still been a British colony then, though was about to gain independence. To put it mildly, he was not comfortable with the changes. The noise, the smells, the dirt, the chaos, all the usual things. These had been there before, but, according to him, and I'm sure it's true, they were controlled by the British presence. Now they had been let loose. While we were in Madras you could see he was questioning the wisdom of his visit, but once we left the big city and went to our bungalow in the hills he could relax as the assault on his mind and senses abated somewhat. Here is a picture of him in our garden in Yercaud. And here's one of Michael and a bit of me taken at the same time. Michael is in a planter's chair which has extendable arms on which you can put your feet, which might seem a good idea but is actually very uncomfortable. There was no point in Hugh coming all the way to India just to sit in our bungalow for a couple of weeks, so we planned a trip to Ootacamund as it was then known. Now it's been renamed Ootacamund, but everyone calls it by its traditional abbreviated name of Ooty. Ooty was one of those hill stations developed by the British as an escape from the heat of the plains. It had a racecourse, a golf course, an artificial lake, and there was even a hunt with imported hounds chasing local jackals. The cream of Indian society visited it in the season, which would have been during the hot weather, and it is still popular, though down on its luck from its British heyday. Situated in the Nilgiri Hills, Nilgiri means blue hills, and around 7,000 feet above sea level, it is also known for its extensive tea plantations as well as eucalyptus and pine, all introduced by the British. Hugh hired a car and a driver and we drove the 150 miles to Ooty. The climb up the hills was similar to the one from the plains up to Yercaud, though grander, with 36 hairpin bends as opposed to a mere 21, and with tamer monkeys who would come to be fed bananas when we stopped at one of the rudimentary halts along the way. As always when ascending, the air became fresher, the temperature dropped, and the light acquired an intellectually invigorating clarity. Michael and I had been to Ooty before, so knew what to expect when we arrived at the town, but poor Hugh was once again disappointed, having been raised on the idea of Ooty as the queen of the hills and a shining light of civilized elegance. Now much of it was little more than a shanty town, but there were bright spots, such as the Ooty Botanical Gardens, still beautiful. However, our hotel, a recently built government tourist affair, clean but basic, was not to Hugh's taste, and on the first morning immediately after breakfast he went off on his own without informing us where he was going. He came back just before lunch with a triumphant look on his face. He had managed to get a room at the exclusive Ooty Club. This was a members-only place, but he had talked his way in by flaunting his colonial antecedents, which seemingly still carried some weight. He graciously invited Michael and me to dinner at his club that evening, and we gratefully accepted. The Ootacamund Club was founded in 1841 for the planters and convalescing soldiers who came to the more salubrious climate of Ooty to recover from whatever might have been ailing them, and there was a lot to do that for Europeans in the tropics in those days. It's been described as a relic of the Raj, and certainly was that in 1981. You still had to wear a jacket and tie at the bar, which Hugh, being an English gentleman of a certain era, had no trouble in doing. Michael had a tie but no jacket, and I had neither. But they let me into the restaurant, which looked exactly then as it does in this recent picture from their website. The most famous story relating to the Ooty Club is that this was where the game of snooker was invented, and the club secretary kindly let me knock a few balls about on the very table it was born, or so he said. Perhaps he was persuaded to let me do this by the fact that Michael too had been a club secretary, in his case of the Charlton Club in London between 1960 to 1969, and they could swap notes about difficult members. I also remember visiting the old church of St. Stephen's, now rather forlorn, as though the tide had gone out and wasn't ever going to come back. It was heartbreaking to see the number of tombstones in the cemetery marking the graves of children who had died young, often very young. One forgets how illness and disease laid low the Europeans of those times, who are now denigrated as exploiting colonizers, but who made many sacrifices, including of their lives and those of their women and children. Ooty is famous for its tribal communities. These were the original inhabitants, and their remoteness left them untouched by general Indian culture from far back, never mind the more recent British incursion. The main tribe is that of the Toda, for whom the buffalo is sacred. We went to a Toda village and Hugh chatted to an elder who spoke basic English. It was funny to see the two men together, chalk and cheese in terms of their human types, but bonding by being of a similar vintage and getting on well. I wish I had a photo of the two of them, but I don't''t.I. do, however, have one of me and Hugh on the steps of the Ooty Club. I think they appreciated having someone from the old days there. After a few days we left Ooty to go to a nearby national park, called Mudumalai, which was, and still is, a wildlife sanctuary covering about 120 square miles, and home to a wide range of flora and fauna. There were leopards and tigers, elephants, gaur, Indian bison, chital and sambar deer, with sloth bears and wild boar among the larger species. Then there were dhole, wild dog, and jackal, as well as mongoose, pangolin and porcupine. Various types of monkey were also present, including langur and macaque. The list of birds is even longer, 266 according to Wikipedia. Having had a bird-watching grandfather, these interested me as much as the animals. After a bumpy ride we arrived at the visitors' camp in the early afternoon, and at sunset did the first of our 2 trips into the jungle. For this excursion we went out in a jeep and saw mainly deer and monkeys, with hornbills and eagles among the birds I can remember. The next day at sunrise we went out again, but this time on an elephant, which was much better. The 3 of us sat on a howdah with the mahout perched just behind the elephant's head, guiding the animal by pushing on its ears with his bare feet. Hugh sat on one side of the howdah with Michael and me on the other, and off we went, moving in a slow and stately fashion through the forest. This was a far superior way to experience the jungle, as you became part of it. With no engine noise you could hear the sounds of the forest undisturbed, and sitting on the back of an animal that was a natural product of this environment, you too became attuned to it in a way that wasn't possible in the artificial confines of a motor vehicle. You didn't even need to see any animals to feel a sense of participation in the natural world around you. Luckily though, we did see some animals, and the first we saw after more deer and monkeys was a male gaur, a magnificent beast packed with muscle, that paid no attention to us as it grazed on a mouthful of some vegetable substance. Looking at it you could understand why primitive peoples might have worshipped such an animal as a god. It exuded an imperturbable calm and grave dignity, as if it were an incarnation of archetypal male power and authority from the time when the bull was regarded as a divine being. Many early religions worshipped animals in some form, which we now regard as superstitious nonsense, but we don't understand that both the world and the mind of man were different in the past. There may well have been some basis to this approach to the immaterial worlds on some level. Who, even now, would deny that certain animals carry a spiritual force of some kind, the lion, the eagle and the bull, to name three of the most eminent. As we proceeded into the jungle, I noticed I was getting a better view of the canopy than the floor. There was a reason for this. Hugh was a big man. I was 6'2" back then, less now, and Hugh was an inch or two taller than me. He was also quite a burly fellow, whereas I was already slim, and had lost quite a few pounds since arriving in India. Look at the photo of the two of us on the club steps. Michael was of average height and build, but Hugh's weight had been more than enough to pull the howdah down on his side to the point where what should have been lying flat had tipped over to a sharp angle. The mahout jumped off the elephant and tugged it back into position before Hugh fell out, and we carried on with him leaning back and Michael and me bending forward to balance the thing. I have to say, if it had been attached properly in the first place, this wouldn't have happened, but that's the charm of India. We didn't see any tigers, but we did see elephants, lots of birds and more deer, but the most exciting part of the trip was when a wild boar came crashing through the undergrowth, heading straight towards us at speed and changing course only at the last moment. Even the elephant was alarmed by it and had to be calmed by the mahout. It was much bigger than any pig I had ever seen, and its coarse hair, fierce eyes and prominent tusks gave it a savage appearance. British Army officers in India used to hunt these animals on horseback with lances in the sport known as pig sticking, and, though it's easy to disapprove of such practices now, the fact is the wild boar is a ferocious and dangerous animal, and the sport requires both great skill and courage. If you came off your horse, you would be in trouble. Fortunately, despite the loose howdah, we stayed on the elephant and made it safely back to camp.